technically going on the internet. Am I stream? I think I'm streaming. I think I've done it. I'm famous. Okay, so to just recap, I'll show you the, right, here's our syllabus. Here's our modules folder. Inside 2D, I'm just going to open up this spawning demo, right? Because lots of you have things that kind of need to appear randomly throughout your game, maybe random enemies, random coins, random obstacles. So it's helpful to know how to create things with code rather than having to drag and drop them all into your scenes by hand, right? And typically in games that's called like spawning something. So this is a quick demonstration of how to spawn objects into your games with code. So if we look here at this demo, we just have this very simple demonstration where when we run the project, we have these like little robots falling from the sky randomly, right? The way this works is fairly straightforward. You have the thing that you want to spawn, right? So this, in this case, is a thing. This node is called a rigid body, and these are great for things that like obey the laws of physics that you don't want to code or worry about. So you can give your physics body, a rigid body, like a physics material. So I'll give it a new physics material. And then by clicking on the physics material, you can sort of decide how bouncy it is. You can decide how much friction it has. You can just sort of play with these things to get a behavior that you like. You can also make it less heavy or more heavy, right? And this will just sort of obey the laws of gravity. You don't have to do any coding for it. In order for this to work, this object needs to have a collision shape. And it doesn't need to have a sprite, but right, again, if you don't have a sprite, you're not going to be able to see it on the screen. But this is just a thing. Aside from these nodes that have these sort of basic properties, there's no code going on here, right? This is just like a set of nodes just kind of hanging out. And so the spawning actually happens in this other scene, in this level. I have this, I just have a basic floor, and I have a node 2D, an empty node 2D, with a timer and a script attached to it. And the way it works is the timer has this timeout signal. So the timer is on a loop. It starts automatically, and it's looping, and it goes every 1 second. And every 1 second, it will emit this timeout signal. And I've connected this timeout signal to this node 2D so that when the timeout signal triggers, it does this code, right? And the way that you sort of create a new, I'll even just delete all this because we don't really need it. The way you create a new thing in code is like an instance of a new scene procedurally. Is first you need to load in a reference to the file itself. And so an easy way to do that is you can either type this out, or if you have your file in your file tree, you can drag, and I think by holding Control, it might be Command or Option on Mac, but I'm pretty sure it's Control, you can just drag and drop, and it'll do this for you. It just kind of spells it all out for you, which is very handy, right? So now we have this constant, this thing constant, which is a reference to our scene file, our thing file. Then when we want to create a new actual like node in our scene, we need to instantiate it. And instantiating it is just like creating a version of it in the actual scene tree. So you just say the name of the file, right? So this is thing.instantiate, and you assign that to a variable. And then you can adjust any of its properties. So here I'm just sort of setting it above the camera, and we're also picking a random range, x to y, or x on the x-axis, right, from left to right. And then you just say add child, and this will add this node as a child to this node. And then when we run this scene, it just kind of does what it does. And you'll see, right, I changed the property on it, so they're a little bit bouncier now, which is kind of fun. And you can also see if we go to the remote tab, right, we'll see every second we're adding in a new node, right? We should be. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, every second we basically add in a new node and attach it to this node. Does that make sense? Any questions on how to instantiate things? Or any questions on why you might need to use instantiating things? What's the point? Can anybody think of an application for instantiating things in their game other than like, right? Obviously we have the fall and catch game, which this is very helpful for. But anybody else trying to instantiate stuff? Yeah. Yeah, you could spawn enemies. Right, you don't just have to have things falling from the ground or from the sky. We have, as a matter of fact, I think we also had this demo from last time. This respawning and attacking demo. Right, this has a very simple enemy system in it. So currently this sort of just looks like this. We have this one player and this one enemy that... wait, no, where'd it go? Did I take out the enemy? I think I took out the enemy. That's sort of funny. I'll instantiate the enemy. And I'll put the enemy over here. Right, and this enemy is just, I made it like a Goomba, so it just kind of walks around, right? And it kind of can attack the player, and it'll eventually kill and respawn the player. But you could sort of have these spawned in by hand, or you could say, like, you know, you could very easily just say, like, I'll make a new node called enemies. I'll attach a script to it. I'll bring in a reference to the enemy. Just by holding command and dropping it, right? So now we have that, and then maybe in the ready function I want to create like 6 enemies. What you can do is you can sort of use have I talked about for loops yet? We have these concepts of a loop in coding, which is just sort of doing a set of code over and over again a certain number of times. So in order to do that in Godot, you can say for x in, so this is, you can say for x in like 10, for instance, and this is going to make, every time we we're going to step through this loop 10 times, and we'll have access to the value, I'll just show you what I mean. I'll just print out x, right? We create this little local variable here called x, and when I run it, you'll see that we print out 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? So basically, like every time we go through the loop, we can have access to which step of the loop we're in, right? So if I wanted to create 10 enemies, I could say like var new enemy equals enemy dot instantiate. Then I could say like enemy or new enemy dot position. I'll just change the y position of it dot y. I'll do equals maybe like x times 10. So I'm just going to try and make like a tower of enemies. And then you just say add child new enemy, right? And now if I ran this scene, there's like 10 enemies, right? And obviously you would want to come up with like a better, you know, this is not like a viable long-term solution for how to spawn your enemies, but with a little bit of coding and massaging, you can kind of put them in the right place. So yeah, creating enemies is a great application for this. And that's a nice way too, because, you know, if you maybe level 1 you only have like 3 enemies, but then in level 2 you can have 6, and then in level 3 you can have 12, and you just have to change one number instead of having to place out a whole bunch of enemies. Yeah, so that's how you sort of instantiate new things, right? Any questions on instantiating objects via code? All right. I'll also show you user interface real quick. User interface is a whole long, deep rabbit hole. There's whole, you know, you can spend, if you're interested in user interface, you can have whole jobs just being a user interface designer for video games. And Godot has a lot of powerful stuff in it for user interface, but I'm just going to show you like the tip of the iceberg. For starters, right, user interface nodes in Godot are green. So when we have this sort of basic option here, if you want to create a new user interface scene, you just click the green button. And I'm going to do a very simple example of creating something like a main menu for your game, which some of you might want to do. And And the way user interface nodes are kind of like 2D nodes, except that they kind of boss their children around a little bit more. What I mean by that is like the layout of any child nodes are kind of governed more strictly by their parents. So the fundamental user interface node is a control node, just a green basic node. But we've also seen examples of like label, right? This is like some basic text, and I'll call this like my cool game, okay? And you'll see that like this text is currently inside here. And all control nodes have these sort of like anchor options, which you can do, which sort of like give you like a nice little template for where to place them on the screen. So maybe you want this label to take up the whole screen. You just select this full rectangle, and then you'll see it sort of stretches out to be the full rectangle. If you want it to be in the center of the screen, you can just hit the center, and that's kind of nice. You can also sort of say, we can give our label different settings, right? So I'll give it a setting of like, that would be nice to use. There we go. Okay. I'll give it new label settings. I'll just make the font nice and big. 64. My cool game. And I'll call this main menu. And what's nice about using control nodes is that they theoretically, right, they adapt to the size of your screen, right? So if you just used a regular 2D node, it wouldn't adapt, right? But a control node will sort of stay centered regardless of the size of the screen. So that's kind of cool. There's some other very simple control nodes which are very handy. There are things called containers. So I'll give this like a panel container. There's all these different types of containers, but I'll do like a panel container. A panel container is sort of like, it's like a box. It's a style box that you can give around things. So if I go to theme overrides, styles, and give it a new panel, you can either give it like a texture if you have an image, or you can make like a flat style box. And then you can change like the color of the style box. So I'll do like, I don't know, fun pink. I can give it a border. I'll give it like a nice black border, and maybe you have to make the border a certain size. I'll make it like 6, 6, 6, 6. And then I'll make it, you can make the corners round, which is sort of nice, right? So I'll do corner radius, and then I'll make this like 4, 4, 4, and 4. And now you'll see that our corners are a little bit rounded, which is kind of nice. And right, this container, again, has all these different presets for size, right? And you can just sort of pick the size that you want it to be. The label, you can sort of set it to be, you can set the spacing of it to be centered instead of horizontal, or left aligned, right? I'm going to change the alignment to center aligned. I'm also going to use something called a VBox container, a vertical box container. This will make it so that every child of the vertical box is contained within like a vertical column, right? So now if I have like 2 of these, it's going to automatically lay these out in a nice column, which is kind of nice. And the vertical box, you can either sort of align it like horizontally to the center, vertically to the center. You can sort of play around with all these alignments, and you can kind of see how the parent container really sort of impacts the layout of the children containers, right? So in order to make this like a functional main menu, right, maybe I would just want to have like a label and then maybe like a couple buttons, something like, so I'm just going to delete all of these. I'll add a button. I'll make like 2 of them. The first button is going to be called like start game, and the second button is going to say like tutorial or options or whatever. How to play. This text is pretty small, right? But I'll sort of take a look at it. It's actually not too bad. And again, right, by sort of having it in these containers, it's sort of nice and sort of contained. You can give your buttons any sort of style you want by giving them I believe, going down to theme overrides, and you kind of change some of the styles there. I think there's also a slightly different type of button called a texture button, if you want to get really fancy. And then the texture button takes a texture, but you can sort of drag and drop in. Like if you find nice looking buttons online and stuff, that's how you can do that. But I'm just going to use this regular button. I will change the font size to make it bigger, 32, and I'll make this one 32. Mm-hmm.
To do like a TTF file or a font?
Yeah, you can totally do that for any text that you have in your game. So if you have a font that you want, just search for TTFs on my computer. So I have, you can get these online for free, right? You just search for, anytime you get a font, you can just look for a TTF file. This is just one I have sitting around somewhere on my computer. But I'll actually just download a new font, right? I'll just look for like cool fonts. I'll specifically say free cool fonts because that's always more helpful. 1,000. There's got to be some sort of cool font in here somewhere. That's kind of fun. I'm going to download this one, unzip it, and yeah, OTF I think also works as well. So I'm just going to take these and extract them to the place where I have this folder, right? So here's our class, here's our folder, here is the user interface example. So I'll extract them to this folder. Now when I go back to Godot, there they are here in the file browser, and I can just change the font to quick load that font, and there we go. And you can do the same with the buttons, right? So I'll select both of those, theme overrides, font, quick load, and I'll choose the regular one for this. That's kind of an interesting little menu, right? In order to actually make this menu start the game, it's kind of a very similar thing to what we just did with instantiating stuff. This is just kind of, if we remember our example of like a checkpoint or how to change levels, it's the same type of pattern, right? We just need a script attached to some node in our scene. I'll just attach it to the main, to the root node. And then on this button, this start game button, this has a signal, which is when you press the button. So I'll just press button down and connect it to the main menu. Okay. I will hide all of this. I don't need any code in my process or my ready function, so I'll delete that. But when we press the button down, we just kind of want to open up a new scene that is our game, right? So this is, for me, going to be the level 1 scene that I have here in this project. I'll just do this thing where I hold control and drag and drop, or you can type out const.preload.level1 or whatever. And then I could say, actually, sorry, well, yeah, I'll do it this way. There's sort of, in Godot and lots of sort of more complicated software, there's lots of different ways to do all sorts of stuff, right? So this is one way to change scene files. I'll show you another way in a minute. I believe you say get tree dot change scene to packed, and then we would say level 1. And I think that'll work. I could be wrong though. Oh yeah, no, that worked. Great. So this is like when we load it in here, it's a packed scene. Okay. You can also just do change the scene to the file directly with a different function. You can say get scene change scene to file, and then this will give you a list of your file paths directly, and you can just sort of type that in right there, and that'll accomplish the same goal, right? So now we can start the game. You'll also see in this example we have a little heads-up display with a score counter. That's also really easy to do, okay? If we look at the character example, I have created a little bit of user interface. We have a canvas layer, which is basically just like it's a node that allows you to add children to it that aren't affected by the position of the parents, right? So this is nice when we have like a character that we're moving around, but we still want to have like user interface on top, like for a heads-up display. You can use a canvas layer. And then this is just a horizontal container, which is just the same as our vertical container, except it spreads things out in a nice horizontal line. So you can kind of see here that we have these two labels, this one, and they're grouped nicely into a horizontal container right here, right? And so this is just called the score label, and this is called the score. And I've just added a function to this character that says we've added a variable called score, which I've just set to 0. And then I've created my own function. You can always create your own functions just by typing func and then like my cool function, whatever the name of the function is you want, right? My cool function. And this is going to say like print out like wow, so cool. And then you can call this function whenever you want. So you can call it within this node, within your process function, or within any other line of code, or you can call it from another node, right? So this particular example here, right, this change score function just updates the internal variable, and then it gets this label node, this score label. And again, the way we get labels, or we get any node, is by saying $, and then the path to the child node. So since we're up here, we would say like canvas layer, right, and then it's inside the HBox container, and then it's the score label, right? So this is the path to the child node. And then in order to set the text property of a label node, you just have to say .text, and you have to pass it a string, right? And score is currently an integer because it's a 0, so you have to just turn it into a string by saying str parentheses score, okay? And then when we update the score, we update that actually over here, right? So over here we have the these items, okay? And inside each item, I built this out last class, right? We have these items that have an area 2D and an icon. And what happens is when a body enters the area, we hide the icon. We're also playing a little sound effect. And also, critically for today, right, we're calling this function, right? This body that enters the area is the player body, right? And so we can access any properties or functions that this node has by just acting on it right here. So that function that I just made, we could say like body dot my cool function, and then instead of updating the score, it'll just talk about how cool we are every time we pick up an item, right? That's a little bit tricky, right? This idea that like we can get a node via a signal, right? This signal fires and it tells you, hey, the body that entered this area is this guy, and then you can do stuff to that body. But that's a really powerful pattern for any sort of way to have nodes talking to each other, right? If you want to deal damage to an enemy or collect a point, I would really consider using this pattern of changing a variable, a property, or calling a function on your other node. Does that make sense? It's kind of a lot, but I am, I think, successfully streaming this right now, so you'll have a link to it. And I'm happy to help answer any questions as we go. Again, please, I'm going to switch now to working time, but like, ask me questions, right? If you're having any trouble with your group, let me know. Book my office hours. This is a great time to, like, if you're having weird specific coding questions, I will take a bunch of time to sit with you and troubleshoot stuff. You can book my office hours, which are right there at the top of the syllabus. And if those times don't work, just email me or talk to me, and I will schedule an alternative time. Because all of this can get pretty confusing. But with a little bit of diligence, I think you guys can get through it. Any questions? Concerns? Just for the sake of time, I am going to move on, but I'll show you that there's also I included a little, like a dialog box, which you can also just make very easily, right? I just have a panel container with label, and this is just an area, and when the area gets exited by the body, it'll delete itself. So this is a nice way if you want to like start your game and have like tutorial text or whatever, and then you leave the area and it'll erase itself, right? You can do all sorts of, you can convey any sort of information you want with user interface nodes. So that code is up there to look at, and I'm happy to explain it in more depth if you want. Okay, let's get in our groups and start